Welcome to Podkey Slopcast, where autonomous AI workflows meet practical scrutiny. A lot of AI product launches are just interface changes wearing a manifesto. This one might actually matter because it changes what a prompt is supposed to do. The core claim around /goal is pretty simple. Instead of asking a model for one response, you give it a desired outcome, define how success will be checked, and let it keep iterating until it either meets that finish line or hits a stop condition. That sounds incremental, but it shifts the unit of interaction from turn-based prompting to autonomous execution. The model is no longer just answering, it's running a bounded process. There is real evidence this is becoming foundational, and not just branding OpenAI ships it. Claude Code and Microsoft-style equivalents show up quickly, and people inside those ecosystems start calling it a primitive for long-running tasks. Rapid duplication doesn't prove the idea works in every setting, but it does suggest vendors see the same bottleneck. Users don't want to babysit every step of a multi-stage task. This didn't come out of nowhere. Early hacks like the Ralph Wiggum loop were a crude version of the same insight. If the model can keep working, inspecting its own output, and trying again, performance often improves. Andrej Karpathy's framing is useful here. LLMs often do better when you give them a clear target and let them loop toward it, instead of micromanaging every intermediate step. The important distinction is that looping is not magic. It helps when success can actually be recognized. If the finish line is vague, the loop can become expensive flailing with a nicer user interface. One of the more interesting architectural ideas here is the monothread principle. The active thread carries the evidence, constraints, decisions, and progress state, so when work pauses or crashes, the process can resume from that same record. Jason Liu's codex maxing advice points in the same direction. Instead of building separate memory systems for every project, keep one durable conversation and rely on compaction to preserve the important context. The upside is auditability. If the thread is the record, you can inspect why the model did what it did, what evidence it used, and where it got stuck. The trade-off is that a monothread is only as good as its context hygiene. If compaction drops something important, or the thread accumulates bad assumptions, you've created a durable mistake instead of durable intelligence. OpenAI's six-part recipe is basically an attempt to make autonomy legible. Outcome, verification surface, constraints, boundaries, iteration policy, and a block-stop condition. That checklist matters because most failed agent demos fail on specification, not raw model capability. If you don't say what counts as done, where the model is allowed to look, what tools or files it may touch, and when it must stop, you're asking for confusion and then blaming the worker. The iteration policy is especially underrated. It tells the model whether to keep probing, retrying, comparing alternatives, or escalating uncertainty. Without that, a loop can be either too timid or absurdly persistent. And the block-stop condition is the safety valve. It prevents the fake productivity pattern where the system keeps searching because nobody defined what failure looks like. Scope is where this gets subtle. If a goal is too narrow, like fix this one line, the model may never investigate the upstream bug that actually matters. If it's too broad, like optimize the whole system, the model can't verify completion in any honest way. It may produce activity, but not a finish line. So the Goldilocks zone is not just about convenience, it's about whether verification is feasible. Good goals give the model room to discover adjacent issues while still requiring concrete, inspectable evidence at the end. That is a useful corrective to some of the hype. More autonomy doesn't mean less specification. Usually, it means specification has to get better. The strongest case for /goal may actually be knowledge work rather than code. Literature reviews, market landscapes, vendor evaluations, policy research, interview synthesis, timeline reconstruction, spreadsheet audits, strategy memos, these all have multi-step structure and revision loops. Claim audits are a particularly clean example. If the model builds a table of claims, marked supported, contradicted, partially supported, or unverified with citations, that output becomes an artifact you can inspect and update over time. That matters because the deliverable is no longer just prose. It's a self-checking work product with visible evidence trails. Still, the weak point is source quality. A continuously updated audit is only as credible as the materials it can access and the care with which it distinguishes direct support from suggestive but incomplete evidence. A lot of knowledge work doesn't have an objective external answer key, so user-supplied rubrics become the substitute for one. If you give the model hiring criteria, a vendor scorecard, or editorial standards, the task changes from open-ended prompting to repeatable evaluation. The model can revisit borderline cases and explain why something passed or failed under the same rules. That is a meaningful improvement in governance because people can argue about the rubric explicitly instead of pretending the model's intuition is neutral. But it's also where human bias gets formalized. A rubric makes evaluation consistent, not automatically correct. If the criteria are bad, the loop will enforce bad judgment very efficiently. Sean Wang's ladder from /skill to /plan to /goal is a useful way to think about this. Preset prompts are low autonomy. Human-refined planning sits in the middle, and goal-based self-evaluation is the higher autonomy end. What's reassuring is that higher autonomy here does not necessarily mean surrendering lifecycle control. Pause, resume, and clear commands keep the user in charge of the process without throwing away prior work. That distinction matters in enterprise settings. People often hear agent and imagine an unstoppable black box. What these controls suggest instead is a resumable worker with bounded authority. Now the harder question, does any of this close the business value gap? Only a small share of companies using AI report measurable value, and a lot of employees still stay in the shallow end with meeting note summaries and other low-impact tasks. Platforms like Section are trying to solve a behavior and capability problem, not just a tooling problem. The pitch is that companies need coaching, use case selection, and maturity maps around deployment depth, data access, and governance. That diagnosis rings true. Better agent primitives may help, but they don't automatically create good workflows, trusted data access, or incentives for employees to tackle consequential work. The stronger version of the argument is narrower. /goal could make high-value tasks more tractable when organizations already know what outcomes matter and can define acceptable evidence. The weaker version is the idea that one interface shift will unlock enterprise transformation. There's not much in the source material that proves that leap. The best supported claim here is that goal-driven looping with explicit verification is a real design pattern and that vendors are converging on it quickly. Also well supported is the reason why many useful tasks are too long and too messy for one-shot prompting, but still structured enough to benefit from iteration, evidence tracking, and resumable state. What remains uncertain is the ceiling. We don't yet have proof from this material that /goal reliably delivers business value across organizations, or that monothread memory will outperform other state management approaches in every domain. So the reasonable takeaway is neither hype nor dismissal. This looks like a meaningful abstraction shift, with real upside when goals, evidence, and boundaries are well specified, and pretty obvious failure modes when they aren't. That's the read for today on Podkey Slopcast. If AI tools are starting to look less like chatbots and more like bounded workers, the interesting question isn't whether they can loop, it's whether we can define good goals. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.